Dorothy Pemberton stood at the large bay window of her Victorian home in Willowbrook Heights, watching the morning mist roll across the manicured gardens she had tended for over 50 years. At 80 years old, her silver hair was still perfectly styled, her posture straight despite the weight of decades, and her green eyes held a sharpness that time hadn't dulled. Today was supposed to be special. Today was her 80th birthday. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 8 times, its deep resonance echoing through rooms filled with family photographs spanning generations. Dorothy had been awake since dawn, not from insomnia, but from anticipation. She had subtly mentioned her upcoming milestone birthday to her children for weeks, dropping hints during their brief phone calls and adding gentle reminders during their rushed visits. Surely, she thought, this birthday would be different. 80 years was significant, a celebration of a life well lived, of wisdom earned, of a woman who had raised 4 children as a single mother after her husband passed away 30 years ago. She had sacrificed everything for her family, working double shifts as a nurse to put them all through college, never remarrying because she wanted to focus entirely on giving them the best life possible. The dining room table was set for 12 people. Dorothy had spent the previous evening polishing her grandmother's china, the delicate blue roses pattern catching the morning light. She had prepared her famous apple cinnamon cake from scratch, the same recipe her mother had taught her 60 years ago. The house smelled like vanilla and cinnamon, warm and inviting, the scent of celebration and love. Her phone sat silently on the kitchen counter. No messages, no calls. Dorothy picked up the phone and scrolled through her contacts. First, she called her eldest son, Robert, who lived just 20 minutes away in the neighboring town of Oakmont Ridge. The call went straight to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Robert Pemberton. I'm probably in a meeting or with a client. Leave a message, and I'll get back to you." She didn't leave a message. What would she say? "Hello, son. It's your mother's 80th birthday, and I'm wondering if you remembered." Next, she tried her daughter Patricia, who lived in the bustling city of Millfield, about an hour's drive away. Patricia was a successful marketing executive, always busy, always stressed, but Dorothy was sure she would remember. Ring, ring, ring. "Mom, is everything okay? I'm literally running into a presentation." "Oh, I just wanted to... Can I call you back later? This client is worth 6 figures, and I can't be late." The line went dead before Dorothy could respond. She tried her youngest son, Michael, who lived across the country in Riverside Canyon. The time difference meant it was still early there, but surely he would answer for his mother. Voicemail again. Finally, she called her daughter Catherine, the baby of the family at 45, who lived locally but had been distant ever since her divorce last year. "Hi, Mom, what's up? I'm dropping the kids at soccer practice." "Well, I thought maybe..." "Mom, can this wait? I'm already running late, and you know how crazy Saturdays are with the kids' schedules." "Of course, dear. Don't worry about it." Dorothy set the phone down and looked around her empty house. The silence was deafening. She walked to the mantelpiece and picked up a framed photo from Robert's college graduation. She remembered how proud she had been that day, how she had worked extra shifts for months to afford his tuition without him knowing. In the photo, he was hugging her, both of them beaming with joy. When had that stopped? When had her children become too busy for the woman who had given up everything for them? She moved to another photo, Patricia's wedding day. Dorothy had spent her entire savings on that wedding, wanting her daughter to have the fairy tale day she deserved. Patricia looked radiant in her white dress, and Dorothy remembered how they had cried together when Patricia said, "I couldn't have done any of this without you, Mom." But where was Patricia now? The kitchen timer chimed, reminding Dorothy that she had dinner in the oven, a pot roast with all the trimmings, enough food for the family gathering she had planned. She turned off the oven and opened the door. The perfectly cooked roast sat there, golden and aromatic, meant to feed a table full of loved ones who apparently had better things to do. Dorothy Pemberton had spent 80 years being the strong one, the provider, the selfless mother who never complained. She had weathered her husband's death, financial struggles, and the challenges of raising 4 children alone. She had attended every school play, every graduation, every wedding, every grandchild's birthday party. She had been the foundation of her family for decades. But as she stood in her kitchen, surrounded by the preparations for a celebration that no one would attend, something inside Dorothy Pemberton shifted. For the first time in her 80 years, she felt invisible, not just forgotten, but completely erased from the lives of the people she loved most. The woman who had given everything was about to discover that sometimes you have to take something back. And what Dorothy was about to do next would send shockwaves through her entire family, teaching them a lesson about love, respect, and the true value of the woman they had taken for granted. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. For the past 5 years, since Dorothy Pemberton retired from her nursing career at Willowbrook General Hospital, her days had followed a predictable rhythm that revolved entirely around her family's needs and schedules. She had structured her entire existence around being available for the people she loved, even when they rarely seemed to notice or appreciate it. Every Monday morning, Dorothy would drive her pristine 2015 sedan to Oakmont Ridge to babysit Robert's twin boys, 8-year-old James and Joshua, while her daughter-in-law Linda attended her yoga classes and spa appointments. Dorothy never minded that Linda treated these babysitting sessions more like a free service than quality time between grandmother and grandsons. She cherished every moment with the boys, helping them with homework, teaching them card games, and listening to their endless stories about school and friends. "Grandma Dorothy always has the best snacks," James would tell his friends, not knowing that Dorothy spent hours researching healthy recipes and shopping for organic ingredients, because Linda had given her a strict list of approved foods. Dorothy had memorized every allergy, every preference, every dietary restriction of her grandchildren, while their own parents often forgot and ordered pizza. Tuesdays were reserved for Patricia's family. Dorothy would pick up her granddaughter Emma from her private school in Millfield and help her with piano practice at Dorothy's house. Emma was exceptionally talented, but Patricia was always too busy with client calls to attend recitals or practice sessions. Dorothy had secretly been paying for Emma's piano lessons for 2 years, telling Patricia the music teacher had offered a quote, scholarship program. "I wish you could come to my recital next week, Grandma," Emma had said just last month, her small fingers dancing across Dorothy's old piano keys. "Mom says she might be there, but she said that about the last 3 recitals too." Dorothy's heart had ached, but she had simply smiled and said, "I'll be in the front row, sweetheart. I always am." Wednesdays were for household management, not just her own, but coordinating her children's lives from afar. She would spend hours on the phone helping Catherine navigate her divorce proceedings, researching lawyers, and even secretly contributing to Catherine's legal fees when her daughter couldn't afford them. Catherine thought she had qualified for some kind of legal aid program, never knowing her mother was working with the law firm directly. "I don't know what I would do without you, Mom," Catherine would say during their weekly crisis calls. "You always know how to fix everything." But when Catherine's custody hearings ended successfully, she had celebrated with friends, posting photos on social media of their night out. Dorothy learned about the victory through Facebook, not a phone call. Thursdays were for Michael, even though he lived 3,000 miles away in Riverside Canyon. Despite the time difference, Dorothy would wake up at 5 a.m. to call him before his workday started, knowing he was struggling with his startup company. She had been quietly transferring money to his business account for months, small amounts she could afford from her pension, telling herself it was an investment in his future. "The company is finally starting to turn around," Michael would tell her during their brief calls, always rushed, always distracted. "I think we might actually make it." He never asked how she was doing, never inquired about her health or her own struggles with the loneliness that had been growing heavier each year. Fridays were for preparation, grocery shopping for the family meals she would cook over the weekend, cleaning her house in case any of her children decided to visit, and organizing family photos that she hoped to share with her grandchildren someday. She had boxes of memories in her spare room, report cards she had saved, childhood artwork, family vacation photos from years when they actually took vacations together. Dorothy's bedroom dresser was covered with framed pictures of her family, but if you looked closely, you would notice something heartbreaking. In almost every photo, Dorothy was the one behind the camera. She was the one capturing everyone else's precious moments, rarely appearing in the memories herself. Her weekly routine also included managing what she privately called the inheritance fund, a substantial savings account worth nearly $800,000 that she had accumulated through decades of careful living, smart investments, and the life insurance payout from her husband's death. Her children didn't know the exact amount, but they knew their mother was comfortable and had often made casual comments about their future security. "Mom's always been so responsible with money," Robert had said to Patricia just last month, not knowing Dorothy was within earshot. "We're lucky she's so financially stable, makes planning for the future easier." Patricia had nodded, adding, "I keep telling David we don't need to worry about our retirement as much because, eventually." They hadn't finished the sentence, but Dorothy understood. Her children had unconsciously factored her death into their financial planning, viewing her savings as their safety net rather than her hard-earned security. Every evening, Dorothy would sit in her favorite armchair, the same chair where she had read bedtime stories to her children decades ago, and scroll through her family's social media accounts. She would see photos of Robert's family at expensive restaurants, Patricia's vacation posts from luxury resorts, Catherine's new purchases for her apartment, and Michael's updates about his business ventures. They were all living full, active lives. They just weren't living them with her. Dorothy had convinced herself this was normal, that this was what aging gracefully meant. Stepping back, making yourself smaller, being grateful for whatever scraps of attention came your way. She had read articles about not being a burden to your adult children, about maintaining independence and giving them space to live their own lives. But deep down, in the quiet moments before sleep, Dorothy sometimes wondered, when had loving her family become a one-way street? When had her role shifted from being a cherished mother to being a convenient resource? When had she become invisible in the lives she had spent 80 years nurturing? She had been living this way for so long that she had almost forgotten there was any other way to exist. Almost. But today, her 80th birthday, something was about to crack in the foundation of Dorothy's carefully constructed, family-centered world. Today, the woman who had spent 8 decades putting everyone else first was about to discover what happened when you reached your breaking point. And once that dam broke, there would be no going back to the quiet, selfless existence Dorothy Pemberton had been living. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, Dorothy had tried calling each of her children twice more. The silence from her phone had become a deafening roar in her ears. She sat at her kitchen table, staring at the elaborate birthday cake she had made, its 80 candles still unlit, waiting for a celebration that was never going to come. The pot roast had grown cold hours ago. The dining room table, set with her finest china and crystal glasses that had belonged to her mother, looked like a museum display, beautiful, untouched, and utterly pointless. Dorothy had even ironed the linen napkins, the ones she only brought out for special occasions. Her 80th birthday had certainly qualified as special in her mind. She picked up her phone one more time and opened her text messages. Maybe they had sent birthday wishes that she had somehow missed. Her heart sank as she scrolled through the few messages she had received. A promotional text from her pharmacy about prescription refills. a reminder from her dentist about her upcoming cleaning, and a spam message about extending her car warranty. Nothing from Robert, nothing from Patricia, nothing from Michael, nothing from Catherine. Dorothy set the phone down and walked to her living room, where she kept her address book, an old-fashioned leather-bound book that she still maintained by hand, with careful notations of birthdays, anniversaries, and important dates. She flipped to the page marked Family and ran her finger down the familiar entries. Robert's birthday, March 15th. She had never missed it. Not once in 42 years. Patricia's birthday, July 22nd. Dorothy had thrown elaborate parties for her daughter every year until Patricia moved away and declared herself too old for family celebrations. Michael's birthday, September 3rd. Even when money was tight as a single mother, Dorothy had always managed to make his day special. Catherine's birthday, December 10th. Dorothy still sent handmade cards and carefully chosen gifts every year. She had attended every graduation, every wedding, every baby shower, every housewarming party. She had been present for every crisis, every triumph, every milestone. She had been the photographer, the organizer, the cheerleader, the financial safety net, and the emotional support system for 4 decades. And they had forgotten her 80th birthday. Dorothy closed the address book and walked to her bedroom, where she opened the top drawer of her antique dresser. Inside was a manila folder labeled Important Documents. Her will, her insurance policies, her banking information, and her investment statements. She pulled out the folder and sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the papers that represented a lifetime of careful saving and responsible planning. The investment summary showed her current balance, $847,392.15. Nearly $850,000 that she had accumulated through decades of working double shifts, living modestly, making smart investments, and sacrificing her own wants for her family's needs. She had always thought of this money as her children's future security, their inheritance, the final gift she could give them after a lifetime of giving. But as she sat there holding the financial documents that represented her life's work, a different thought began to form in her mind. A thought so foreign, so unlike anything Dorothy Pemberton had ever considered, that it made her hands tremble slightly. What if she spent it on herself? The idea was so shocking that she actually said it out loud. What if I spent my own money on myself? Dorothy had never been selfish. She had been raised in an era where women, especially mothers, were expected to sacrifice everything for their families. She had internalized this so completely that the very concept of prioritizing her own desires felt almost sinful. But sitting there on her 80th birthday, forgotten by the children she had devoted her life to, something fundamental shifted inside her. She walked to her computer, a skill she had learned at age 75 because she wanted to email her grandchildren, and opened her internet browser. Almost without conscious thought, she typed, "Luxury cruises for seniors." The screen filled with images of pristine ships sailing through crystal-clear waters, elegant dining rooms, spacious suites with private balconies, and happy elderly passengers dancing, laughing, and living their lives to the fullest. One cruise line's tagline caught her eye, "It's never too late to live your dreams." Dorothy clicked on the first website. Oceanic Luxury Cruises offered a 6-month around-the-world package, departing next month from the port of Millhaven, just 2 hours from Willowbrook Heights. The cruise would visit 37 countries across 6 continents, with stops in places Dorothy had only dreamed of seeing: the Greek islands, the Norwegian fjords, the temples of Cambodia, the beaches of Fiji, the markets of Morocco. The price made her gasp: $89,000 for the Royal Suite package, which included a private balcony, concierge service, specialty dining, shore excursions, and what they called white glove treatment for their most valued guests. $89,000. It was more money than Dorothy had ever spent on herself in her entire life. She had raised 4 children on less than that some years. She had bought used cars, shopped at discount stores, and clipped coupons for decades to save money for her family's future. But as she scrolled through the photos of the royal suite, with its king-sized bed, marble bathroom, and private dining area, Dorothy realized something profound. She had never allowed herself to want anything this much. She had spent 80 years wanting things for other people, never for herself. The cruise itinerary read like a fantasy. Day 15, Santorini, Greece. Watch the sunset from your private balcony as we sail past the famous blue-domed churches. Day 32, Kyoto, Japan. Experience a traditional tea ceremony in a centuries-old temple. Day 89, Sydney, Australia. See the Opera House illuminated against the harbor at night. Day 156, Cape Town, South Africa. Safari excursion to see the Big Five in their natural habitat. Dorothy had always loved travel documentaries, but she had never traveled anywhere herself except for a few modest family vacations when the children were young. Her passport had expired 20 years ago because she had never needed it. She had convinced herself that travel was frivolous, that the money was better saved for emergencies or her children's needs. But sitting there, reading about places she had only seen in magazines, Dorothy felt something awakening inside her, a hunger for experiences, for adventure, for a life lived fully rather than just endured. She picked up her phone and, before she could lose her nerve, dialed the number on the cruise website. Oceanic Luxury Cruises, this is Amanda speaking. How can I help you live your dream vacation today? Dorothy's voice came out smaller than she intended. I'm interested in your 6-month world cruise. The one departing next month. Wonderful. That's our most popular package for discerning travelers. Are you looking at our Royal Suite option? Dorothy took a deep breath. Yes, I am. Excellent choice. The Royal Suite includes everything you need for the journey of a lifetime. May I ask, is this for a special occasion? Dorothy looked around her empty house, at the cold birthday cake, at the dining table set for 12 people who never came. Yes, she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. It's for my 80th birthday. How wonderful! What a perfect way to celebrate such a milestone. Now, I should mention that we do require full payment within 48 hours to secure your booking, given how close we are to departure. Will that be a problem? Dorothy looked at her investment statement again. $89,000 out of $847,000. It was barely more than 10% of her savings. She had spent more than that on Patricia's wedding. She had probably spent more than that on all the secret financial help she had given her children over the years. No, Dorothy said, surprised by the firmness in her own voice. That won't be a problem at all. As she gave Amanda her information and confirmed her booking, Dorothy felt something she hadn't experienced in decades: excitement about her own future. For the first time in 80 years, Dorothy Pemberton was doing something purely for herself. And she had absolutely no idea that this single phone call was about to change everything. Not just for her, but for the entire family who had forgotten that the woman they took for granted was still very much alive, still had dreams, and still had the power to surprise them all. 3 days had passed since Dorothy booked her cruise, and she had spent them in a strange state of suspended animation. She hadn't told anyone about her decision yet, carrying the secret like a warm stone in her chest. Every morning, she woke up with a flutter of excitement mixed with terror. Had she really done it? Had she actually spent $89,000 on herself? The confirmation email sat in her inbox like evidence of a crime she wasn't sure she was ready to confess to. But Dorothy found herself reading it over and over again, memorizing the details of her upcoming adventure. Royal Suite 847 on the Empress of the Seas. Departure date, October 15th, just 3 weeks away. 6 months of luxury, exploration, and freedom. It was Thursday morning when Dorothy's carefully maintained secret began to unravel. She was watering her orchids in the front window when she saw Robert's car pulling into her driveway. Her stomach immediately clenched. Robert never visited unannounced. In fact, Robert rarely visited at all unless he needed something. She watched through the lace curtains as her eldest son climbed out of his BMW, his face wearing that expression she recognized from his childhood. The look he got when he was about to ask for something he wasn't sure he deserved. Dorothy quickly smoothed her hair and opened the front door before he could knock. "Robert, what a lovely surprise. Come in, dear." Her son gave her a distracted kiss on the cheek and followed her into the living room. He seemed agitated, running his hands through his thinning hair, a nervous habit he'd had since he was 12. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, settling into the chair across from her favorite spot on the sofa. Dorothy's heart began to race. Did he know about the cruise somehow? Had the bank called him? But that was impossible. He wasn't on any of her accounts. "Of course, sweetheart. Is everything all right? Is Linda okay? The boys?" "Everyone's fine, Mom. It's just—" Robert paused, looking uncomfortable. "I hate to ask this, but Linda and I are in a bit of a financial bind." Dorothy felt a familiar sinking feeling. How many times over the years had these conversations started exactly this way? How many emergencies had she solved with quiet transfers from her savings account? "What's happened?" she asked, though she was already mentally calculating how much she could afford to give him. Robert shifted in his chair, avoiding her eyes. "It's the business, Mom. We've been struggling more than I let on. The economy, you know. And we've got the boys' private school tuition due next month, plus Linda's been talking about redoing the kitchen, and honestly, we're stretched pretty thin." Dorothy waited for him to continue, though she could already see where this was heading. "I was wondering if you might be able to help us out. Just temporarily, of course. Maybe $15,000? I know it's a lot to ask, but you've always been so generous, and we'd pay you back as soon as things turn around." There it was, $15,000. Dorothy did quick math in her head. That was about what she had spent on just the shore excursions for her cruise. The irony wasn't lost on her. "$15,000, she repeated quietly. "I know it sounds like a lot, Mom, but you've always said family comes first. And honestly, with your situation, you don't really need much at your age, right? You live so simply and you've always been so good with money." Her situation. Dorothy almost laughed at the phrase. Her situation was being 80 years old and apparently expected to fund everyone else's dreams while abandoning her own. "Robert," she said carefully, "when was my birthday?" Her son blinked, clearly caught off guard by the question. "Your birthday? Mom, what does that have to do with?" "Just answer the question, please. When was my birthday?" Robert's face went through several expressions. Confusion, then calculation, then something that might have been panic. It was recently, wasn't it? This month? "It was Monday, 3 days ago, my 80th birthday." The color drained from Robert's face. Dorothy watched as the realization hit him. Not just that he had forgotten, but that he had come here asking for money just days after missing one of the most significant birthdays of her life. "Oh God, Mom, I'm so sorry. I've been so stressed with work, and Linda's been dealing with her mother's health issues, and the boys have been—" "You forgot," Dorothy said simply. "You all forgot." Robert opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. They both knew there was no excuse that could make this better. "Mom, I feel terrible. Let me make it up to you. We'll take you out to dinner this weekend, somewhere really nice, my treat, and maybe we can plan a belated birthday party." "With what money?" Dorothy asked quietly. "The money you just asked me to lend you?" Robert's face flushed red. That's different. The business loan is separate from—" "Is it?" Dorothy stood up and walked to her mantelpiece, where her banking statements lay in a neat pile. She had been reviewing them earlier, double-checking her finances after the cruise booking. "Do you know how much money I've given you over the years, Robert?" "Mom, you don't keep track of things like that. Family doesn't." "I do keep track." Dorothy picked up a small notebook she had been maintaining for years. "Last Christmas, when you said the business was slow, $8,000. The boys' summer camp fees that Linda said were, quote, unexpectedly expensive, $3,200. The emergency car repair that couldn't wait, $2,500. Your anniversary trip to Napa Valley that you said was necessary for Linda's mental health, $4,000. Robert stared at her, his mouth slightly open. You wrote it all down? I wrote it all down, Dorothy confirmed. Do you know what the total is? Just for you, just in the last 2 years? $34,700. Almost $35,000. But Mom, we never asked you to keep track. You always said it was your pleasure to help. It was my pleasure, Dorothy said, her voice growing stronger. It was my pleasure because I thought I was helping my son build a life. I thought I was investing in my family's happiness. I thought that maybe, just maybe, some of that love and generosity would come back to me when I needed it. Robert looked stricken. Mom, of course we love you. Of course we appreciate everything you've done. Then why didn't you call me on my birthday? The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Robert opened his mouth several times, but no words came out. I spent Monday sitting in this house, Dorothy continued, with a birthday cake I made myself, at a table set for 12 people, waiting for my family to remember that I exist. Do you know what that feels like, Robert? To realize that the people you've spent your entire life loving have forgotten you exist? Mom, please, it was just a mistake. We've all been so busy. Too busy for a phone call, too busy for a text message, too busy to remember that your mother turned 80 years old? Robert stood up, clearly distressed. Okay, we messed up badly, but that doesn't mean we don't love you. It doesn't mean we don't appreciate everything you've done for us. Dorothy looked at her son, this 42-year-old man who still came to his mother when he needed money, who still expected her to solve his problems and fund his lifestyle, but who couldn't remember the most important day of her year. You want to know something interesting, Robert? She said, walking back to her chair. I've made a decision about my money, about my future. What do you mean? Dorothy sat down and folded her hands in her lap, feeling calmer than she had in days. I mean that for the first time in my life, I am going to spend my money on something I want. Something just for me. Robert's expression shifted from guilt to concern to something that looked suspiciously like alarm. Mom, what are you talking about? I'm talking about living my life, Robert. I'm talking about doing something that makes me happy instead of just making everyone else comfortable. But Mom, you can't just... we've always planned, that is, we've always assumed. You've always assumed that my money would be there for you when you needed it, Dorothy finished. You've assumed that I would keep living this quiet little life, saving every penny so that someday, when I'm gone, you'll all inherit a nice nest egg. Robert's face had gone very pale. We don't think about it like that. Don't you? The silence that followed was deafening. Dorothy could see the wheels turning in her son's mind, the calculations, the panic, the realization that his financial safety net might not be as secure as he had always believed. And for the first time in her adult life, Dorothy Pemberton felt powerful. Robert left Dorothy's house that Thursday afternoon in a state of barely controlled panic, but instead of reflecting on his behavior or acknowledging his mistakes, he immediately fell back into old patterns. Within an hour of leaving his mother's driveway, he was on a 3-way conference call with Patricia and Catherine, doing what the Pemberton children had always done when faced with uncomfortable truths about their treatment of their mother. They tried to manage the situation rather than change their behavior. She's being dramatic, Patricia said from her corner office in Millfield, her voice carrying that dismissive tone she used when discussing anyone she considered beneath her professional status. Mom's always been emotional about birthdays. Remember when she cried because we were 10 minutes late to her 75th? This is different, Pat, Robert insisted, pacing in his home office, while Linda gestured frantically from the kitchen, mouthing questions he couldn't answer. She had this look in her eyes, and she's been keeping track of every dollar she's given us. She had it written down in a notebook like some kind of accountant. Catherine, who was sitting in her car outside her divorce lawyer's office, let out a bitter laugh. Of course she's keeping track. She's probably planning to guilt us about it for the rest of our lives. That's so typical of her generation. They give you money and then hold it over your head forever. You don't understand, Robert said, his voice rising. She said she's going to spend her money on herself. She said she's done funding our lives. There was a moment of silence as the implications sank in. Patricia was the first to speak, her voice sharp with calculation. How much money are we talking about, Robert? I mean, what's she actually got saved? I don't know exactly, but it's substantial. She mentioned something about making decisions about her future. And the way she said it. Robert trailed off, remembering the unfamiliar steel in his mother's voice. Look, Catherine interjected, we just need to smooth this over. Send her some flowers, take her to dinner, maybe buy her something nice. She'll calm down once she feels appreciated again. Did you not hear what I just said? Robert's frustration was mounting. This isn't about flowers, Catherine. She's talking about changing how she handles her money. Do you realize what that could mean for all of us? Patricia's administrative assistant knocked on her office door, holding up a finger to indicate she needed 1 more minute. Okay, here's what we're going to do, she said in her take-charge voice. We'll organize a big family dinner this weekend. Make a huge deal about her belated birthday. Get the grandkids involved, make her feel special. She'll forget all about this independence phase she's going through. Independence phase? Robert repeated incredulously. Patricia, she's 80 years old. She's not going through a rebellious teenager phase. She's genuinely upset with us, and maybe she has every right to be. Don't be ridiculous, Patricia snapped. Mom loves taking care of us. It gives her purpose. Without us depending on her, what would she do with herself? She'd be miserable. Meanwhile, Catherine was already crafting her approach. I'll call her tonight and really lay on the guilt about my divorce situation. Remind her how much I need her support right now. She can't stay mad at me when I'm going through the worst time of my life. That's your solution? Robert asked. Manipulate her with your divorce drama? It's not manipulation, it's family loyalty, Catherine shot back. Mom has always been there for us when we needed her. That's what families do. She's just having a moment because we forgot her birthday. Once we make it up to her, everything will go back to normal. But even as Catherine said the words, she felt a small knot of unease in her stomach. Normal meant calling her mother every time she needed someone to watch the kids, every time she couldn't afford something, every time she needed emotional support without offering any in return. Normal meant treating Dorothy like a combination ATM and therapist rather than a person with her own needs and feelings. Robert ended the call feeling more unsettled than reassured. His siblings' casual dismissal of their mother's concerns felt wrong to him, but he couldn't quite articulate why. Instead of calling Dorothy directly to apologize, he decided to take Patricia's advice and plan something elaborate that would demonstrate their love without requiring him to actually examine his own behavior. He spent the rest of the evening researching expensive restaurants and luxury gifts online, calculating how much he could afford to spend on his mother's belated birthday celebration. The irony that he was planning to spend money he didn't have on a gift for the woman he had just asked for a loan was completely lost on him. Patricia, true to form, dealt with her anxiety about the situation by throwing herself even deeper into her work. She stayed at the office until nearly midnight, telling herself that her mother's tantrum was just a temporary blip that would resolve itself once they showed her some attention. She drafted emails to high-end department stores, looking for personal shoppers who could help her select an appropriately expensive gift that would demonstrate her success and generosity. But underneath her business-like efficiency, Patricia was wrestling with memories she'd been suppressing for years. She remembered being 12 years old and watching her mother work double shifts at the hospital, coming home exhausted but still helping with homework and packing lunches for the next day. She remembered her mother attending every school play, every graduation, every important moment, even when it meant missing sleep or meals. When had Patricia stopped noticing those sacrifices? When had her mother's constant presence become something she simply expected, rather than appreciated. Catherine's approach was more direct, but equally self-serving. She called Dorothy that evening, ready to deploy the emotional manipulation tactics that had always worked in the past. "Mom, I've been thinking about what Robert told me," she began, her voice carefully modulated to sound vulnerable and contrite. "I feel terrible about missing your birthday. I've been so overwhelmed with the divorce and the custody issues that I completely lost track of dates." Dorothy's response was not what Catherine expected. Instead of immediately reassuring her daughter and accepting the excuse, Dorothy simply said, "I see. The thing is, Mom, I really need you right now. This whole divorce process has been so devastating, and you're the only person who really understands what I'm going through. I was actually hoping we could spend some time together this weekend. Maybe you could help me figure out how to talk to the kids about the custody arrangements." Again, Dorothy's response was unexpectedly reserved. "That sounds like something you should discuss with your therapist, dear." Catherine felt a chill run down her spine. Her mother had never suggested she handle her own problems before. Dorothy had always been eager to dive into every crisis, to offer solutions and support, and, when necessary, financial assistance. "Mom, are you okay? You sound different." "I'm fine, Catherine. I'm just reassessing some things." "What kind of things?" "My priorities," Dorothy said simply. "My time. My resources. My future." The word resources hit Catherine like a cold slap. Like her siblings, she had grown comfortable with the assumption that her mother's financial stability was, in a way, her financial stability too. The idea that Dorothy might start prioritizing her own needs over her children's wants was genuinely terrifying. "Mom, I hope you're not making any big decisions while you're upset about the birthday thing. I mean, you wouldn't want to do something rash that you might regret later." "What kind of decisions are you worried about, Catherine?" The question was so direct, so unlike her mother's usual gentle deflection of conflict, that Catherine found herself scrambling for words. I mean, we all depend on you so much. You're the foundation of our family. If you suddenly changed how you handle things, it would affect all of us." "Yes," Dorothy said quietly, "I'm beginning to understand that." After Catherine hung up, she sat in her car for 20 minutes, staring at her phone and trying to shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in her relationship with her mother. For the first time in her adult life, Catherine felt like she was talking to a stranger, rather than the predictably supportive woman who had always prioritized her children's needs above her own. All three siblings went to bed that night telling themselves that their mother was simply having an emotional reaction to a forgotten birthday, that she would come to her senses once they showered her with belated attention and expensive gifts. They convinced themselves that Dorothy's newfound assertiveness was temporary, a phase that would pass once they made the appropriate gestures of love and appreciation. None of them considered the possibility that their mother had finally reached a breaking point that couldn't be fixed with flowers and dinner reservations. None of them imagined that Dorothy had already taken action that would change their family dynamics forever. And none of them suspected that in less than 3 weeks, their mother would be sailing away from Willowbrook Heights on the adventure of a lifetime, leaving behind a family that was finally about to learn what life looked like without Dorothy Pemberton's constant, selfless support. The weekend arrived with the kind of autumn crispness that Dorothy had always loved, but this Saturday morning felt different from any she had experienced in decades. She was sitting at her kitchen table with her laptop open, researching what to pack for a 6-month cruise, when her doorbell rang at exactly 9 a.m. Through the peephole, she could see all 4 of her children standing on her front porch, along with several of her grandchildren. Patricia was holding an enormous bouquet of roses. Catherine had what looked like an expensive gift bag. Robert was carrying a large cake box, and even Michael, who never visited, was there with his wife Jennifer and their 2 teenagers. Dorothy took a deep breath and opened the door to find her entire family wearing matching guilty expressions and overly bright smiles. Surprise! Patricia announced with theatrical enthusiasm. We're here for your belated birthday celebration. We felt so terrible about missing your actual birthday, Catherine added quickly, so we decided to make it up to you in a big way. Dorothy stepped aside to let them in, watching as they filed into her living room like a delegation arriving for difficult negotiations. The grandchildren immediately dispersed to explore the house they rarely visited, while the adults arranged themselves with uncomfortable formality on her furniture. You didn't need to do all this, Dorothy said quietly, though she found herself studying their faces with new clarity. When had Robert started looking so desperate around the eyes? When had Patricia developed that hard line around her mouth that appeared whenever she was trying to control a situation? When had Catherine begun using that manipulative tone even when talking to her own mother? Of course we did, Michael said with forced cheerfulness. You're our mother, and you deserve to be celebrated. We brought your favorite cake from Belmore's Bakery, and Patricia got you something really special. Patricia stepped forward with her gift, a jewelry box from Tiffany & Company. Dorothy recognized the distinctive blue packaging and felt a familiar stab of guilt. How much had this cost? How much money were her children spending on her because they felt obligated, not because they genuinely wanted to celebrate her? Patricia, this is too much, Dorothy said, accepting the heavy box. Nothing's too much for you, Mom, Patricia replied, but Dorothy caught the way her daughter's eyes flicked nervously to Robert. They had clearly coordinated this entire production, probably down to who would say what and when. Dorothy opened the jewelry box to reveal an elegant pearl necklace with matching earrings. It was beautiful, expensive, and exactly the kind of classic appropriate for her age gift that her children always chose for her. Safe. Predictable. Something a proper elderly lady would wear to church. It's lovely, she said, and it was. But as she held the pearls, Dorothy found herself thinking about the cruise ship's evening dress code, about dining under the stars in the Mediterranean, about dancing on deck while sailing past exotic coastlines. When would she ever wear these pearls? To the grocery store? To her doctor's appointments? To the solitary dinners she ate in her empty house? There's more, Robert said, pulling out his phone. I made reservations at Le Bernardin for next Friday night. The whole family, 7:30. Dorothy recognized the restaurant name. It was the most expensive place in Millfield, the kind of restaurant her children went to for special occasions, but had never taken her to before. And, Catherine added with growing enthusiasm, I arranged for us to have a family photo session next Saturday. Professional photographer, the works. We haven't had a proper family portrait in years. Dorothy looked around at her children and grandchildren, all of them watching her expectantly, waiting for her to become emotional with gratitude, to tell them how wonderful they were, to reassure them that their elaborate gestures had erased the hurt of being forgotten. Instead, she found herself asking, why now? The question seemed to catch them off guard. Michael was the first to respond. What do you mean? Why now? Because we love you, Mom. Because we want to celebrate you. You want to celebrate me, Dorothy repeated slowly. The same week that Robert came here asking for $15,000. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Robert's face flushed red, and Dorothy could see Patricia shooting him a furious look. Mom, that's completely separate, Robert said weakly. My financial situation has nothing to do with... Doesn't it? Dorothy interrupted, her voice remaining calm but carrying an edge none of them had ever heard before. Let me ask you something, all of you. If I had called you on Monday and told you I needed help, that I was lonely, that I was struggling with something, would you have come? Of course we would have, Catherine said immediately. Would you? Because I've been lonely for years, and none of you noticed. I've been struggling with the feeling that I don't matter to any of you anymore, and none of you cared enough to see it. Patricia shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Mom, that's not fair. We all have busy lives, responsibilities. Yes, you do, Dorothy agreed. And I've spent 80 years making sure that your responsibilities were easier to handle. I've been your babysitter, your bank, your therapist, your event planner, your emergency contact, and your emotional support system. But what have I been to myself? The question hung in the air like an accusation. 10-year-old Emma, Patricia's daughter, looked up from the photo albums she had been flipping through. "Grandma Dorothy, are you sad?" she asked with the innocent directness that only children possess. Dorothy looked at her granddaughter, this beautiful little girl who barely knew her despite all the piano lessons Dorothy had secretly paid for, all the recitals Dorothy had attended alone because Patricia was always too busy. "I was sad, sweetheart," Dorothy said gently, "but I'm not anymore." "Why were you sad?" Emma persisted, ignoring her mother's attempts to shush her. "Because I forgot something very important," Dorothy said, still looking at Emma but speaking to the entire room. "I forgot that I'm a person too. I forgot that I have dreams and wants and needs that matter just as much as everyone else's." Michael cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Mom, we've never expected you to forget about yourself. We want you to be happy." "Do you?" Dorothy asked. "Because when I mentioned to Robert that I was going to spend money on something that would make me happy, he looked terrified." "Why do you think that is, Michael?" Michael glanced at his siblings, clearly realizing he was walking into a trap he didn't understand. "I think," Dorothy continued, "it's because all of you have gotten very comfortable thinking of my money as your future security. You've made plans based on the assumption that I would live quietly, spend modestly, and leave you a substantial inheritance when I die." "That's not true," Patricia said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Isn't it? Then why are you all here today? Spending money you can't afford on gifts and dinners, trying to make me feel appreciated. What are you afraid I might do with my money?" The silence that followed was deafening. Dorothy could see the truth written on their faces. The fear, the calculation, the realization that their financial safety net might not be as secure as they had always assumed. Robert was the first to break. "Okay, yes, we've always known you were financially stable. And yes, we've probably taken some comfort in knowing that you were responsible with your money. But that doesn't mean we don't love you for who you are." "When was the last time any of you called me just to talk?" Dorothy asked. "Not because you needed something, not because there was a crisis or a favor to ask, but just because you wanted to hear my voice." The silence stretched on until young Emma spoke up again. "I don't remember you ever calling just to talk to us, Grandma." "Emma!" Patricia hissed, but Dorothy held up her hand. "She's right," Dorothy said. "I always called when you needed me, but I never expected you to call just because you missed me. I taught you that my job was to give, and your job was to take. I taught you that my needs didn't matter as much as yours." Catherine's eyes were beginning to fill with tears, but Dorothy wasn't sure if they were tears of genuine remorse or tears of panic about what this conversation might mean for her financial future. "The truth is," Dorothy continued, "I've enabled all of you to treat me like a resource instead of a person. I've made it so easy for you to take me for granted that you probably don't even realize you're doing it anymore." "Mom, please," Michael said, his voice strained. "Tell us what you want us to do. Tell us how to fix this." Dorothy looked at her youngest son, this 40-year-old man who had been taking money from her for his business ventures while living 3,000 miles away and calling her only when he needed something. "I don't want you to fix anything, Michael," she said. "I want you to understand that it's too late for that." "What do you mean, too late?" Patricia's voice was sharp with panic. Dorothy stood up and walked to her mantelpiece, where the cruise confirmation email was folded neatly beside her family photos. "I mean that I've already made my decision about how I want to spend the rest of my life. And for the first time in 80 years, that decision is based on what I want, not what all of you need." She turned to face her family, this collection of people she had loved and sacrificed for and enabled for decades, and felt something she had never experienced before, complete clarity about who she was and what she deserved. "I'm leaving," she said simply, "and I'm not coming back." The words, "I'm leaving and I'm not coming back," seemed to echo in Dorothy's living room like a gunshot. For a moment, nobody moved. The grandchildren stopped their exploration of the house and turned to stare at their grandmother, sensing the gravity of something they didn't fully understand. The adults sat frozen, processing what they had just heard. Patricia was the first to recover, her corporate training kicking in as she shifted into damage control mode. "Mom, you're upset, and rightfully so, but let's not say things we might regret later," she said in the calm, measured tone she used with difficult clients. "Maybe we should all take a breath and discuss this rationally." "I am being rational," Dorothy replied, her voice steady and clear. "Probably more rational than I've been in decades." Robert stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "Mom, what do you mean you're leaving?" "Leaving to go where? You can't just— You live here. This is your home." "This is my house," Dorothy corrected him. "But it stopped being my home years ago, when it became nothing more than a place where I wait for phone calls that never come and visits that only happen when someone needs something." Catherine's tears were flowing freely now, but Dorothy noticed they seemed more panicked than sorrowful. "Mom, please, you're scaring us. Just tell us what this is about. Is it money? Are you having financial problems? Because we can help." "Help?" Dorothy almost laughed. "Catherine, you've been divorced for 8 months, and in that time you've asked me for money 6 times. You've needed babysitting 12 times. You've called me crying about your problems 23 times. But you've asked me how I'm doing exactly 0 times. The precision of Dorothy's accounting hit Catherine like a physical blow. I didn't realize I was. I always assumed you were okay. You always seemed so strong, so together." "I seem that way because that's what you needed me to be," Dorothy said. "All of you needed me to be the strong one, the reliable one, the one who never had problems of her own. So that's what I became. But do you know what I gave up to be that person for you?" Michael, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke up. "What do you mean, gave up?" Dorothy walked to her bookshelf and pulled out a dusty photo album from the bottom shelf. She opened it to reveal pictures from her younger years. Dorothy in nursing school, Dorothy volunteering at the local theater, Dorothy hiking in the mountains with friends, Dorothy laughing at a dinner party with people her children had never met. "I gave up friendships because I was always available for your emergencies. I gave up hobbies because your needs came first. I gave up travel because I was saving money for your educations, your weddings, your houses, your children. I gave up the possibility of remarrying because I thought it might confuse you kids or take attention away from you." She flipped to a page showing a young Dorothy in a beautiful evening gown, standing next to a man her children didn't recognize. "This was Harold Mitchell," she said quietly. "I met him 2 years after your father died. He was kind, funny, intelligent. He wanted to marry me, wanted to travel the world with me. He had a successful import business and could have given me a completely different life." "Why didn't you marry him?" Emma asked, with innocent curiosity. Dorothy smiled sadly at her granddaughter. "Because Robert was struggling in high school and needed extra tutoring. Because Patricia was applying to expensive colleges and needed financial support. Because Michael was going through his rebellious phase and needed stability. Because Catherine was still so young and needed her mother." "So you chose us," Catherine whispered. "I chose you," Dorothy confirmed, "and Harold moved to Europe and eventually married someone else. Someone who was free to build a life with him." The weight of this revelation settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Robert sank back into his chair, his face pale. "Mom, we never asked you to sacrifice your happiness for us." "No, you didn't ask," Dorothy agreed, "but you accepted it. And when you became adults with your own families, you kept accepting it. You got so comfortable with my sacrifices that they became invisible to you." Patricia's phone buzzed with what was undoubtedly an urgent work email, but for once, she didn't reach for it. So what are you saying, Mom? That you resent us? That you regret having children? I'm saying that I love you more than life itself, but I've finally realized that love shouldn't require me to disappear as a person. I'm saying that I've spent 50 years being your mother, and I've forgotten how to be Dorothy. But you can't just leave, Michael protested. What about the grandchildren? What about family dinners and holidays? What about us needing you? Dorothy looked at her youngest son with a mixture of love and sadness. Michael, you live 3,000 miles away. When was the last time you came home for a family dinner that wasn't a major holiday? When was the last time you needed me for anything other than money? Michael opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. The truth was uncomfortably clear. Dorothy pulled the folded cruise confirmation from the mantelpiece and held it up for them to see. 3 weeks from today, I'm boarding a ship for a 6-month cruise around the world. I'm going to visit 37 countries. I'm going to see the sunrise over Santorini and the northern lights in Norway. I'm going to eat dinner in floating restaurants in Bangkok and go on safari in South Africa. A 6-month cruise? Patricia's voice was barely above a whisper. Mom, do you have any idea how much something like that costs? $89,000, Dorothy said calmly, for the royal suite with a private balcony and concierge service. The silence that followed was deafening. Dorothy could practically see the calculations running through her children's minds. $89,000 that would never be part of their inheritance. $89,000 spent on their mother's happiness instead of their financial security. Mom, Robert said carefully, that's a lot of money. Maybe we should think about this together, as a family. Maybe there are more affordable ways for you to travel. Ways that don't require such a significant investment. You mean ways that don't cut into your inheritance? Dorothy said bluntly. That's not what I meant. That's exactly what you meant, Robert. And you know what? You're right. $89,000 is a lot of money. It's probably more than you make in a year, after taxes. It's more than Patricia spent on her last vacation. It's more than Catherine's entire divorce settlement. It's more than Michael has ever invested in his own business ventures. She looked around the room at her family, these people she had loved and nurtured and supported for decades, and felt a strange sense of liberation. But it's also less than I've given all of you over the past 5 years. It's less than I spent on Patricia's wedding. It's less than I've contributed to Robert's business and his children's education. It's my money, earned through 40 years of working as a nurse, saved through decades of living modestly and denying myself luxuries so that I could provide for all of you. Catherine was crying openly now. Mom, please don't do this. Please don't leave us. We can change. We can be better. We can include you more, call you more, visit more. When? Dorothy asked simply. When will you call me more, Catherine? Between your yoga classes and your therapy sessions and your dates with the men you meet on those apps. When will you visit me more, Patricia? Between your 70-hour work weeks and your networking events and your business trips. When will you need me for something other than money, Robert? When will you come home for something other than Christmas, Michael? Each question hit like a carefully aimed arrow, finding its target with devastating accuracy. The truth is, Dorothy continued, all of you have full, busy lives that don't really have room for me except when you need something. And I've finally realized that I deserve to have a full, busy life too. She stood up and smoothed down her skirt, a gesture of finality that made everyone in the room understand that this conversation was ending. I'm leaving in 3 weeks. I've made my decision, and I'm not changing my mind. You can spend the next 3 weeks arguing with me, guilt-tripping me, and trying to manipulate me into staying small and convenient for your lives. Or you can spend the next 3 weeks learning how to be a family that doesn't revolve around what I can do for you. Dorothy looked around the room one more time, at the faces of the people she loved most in the world, the people who had shaped her entire adult life, the people she was finally brave enough to disappoint. The choice, she said quietly, is yours. The week following Dorothy's announcement was unlike anything the Pemberton family had ever experienced. For the first time in decades, Dorothy stopped answering her phone during her children's designated crisis hours. She stopped checking her email obsessively for requests for help. She stopped making herself available at a moment's notice for emergencies that, she was beginning to realize, were rarely actual emergencies. Instead, Dorothy did something she hadn't done in 50 years. She focused entirely on herself. On Monday morning, she drove to Millfield's most exclusive shopping district and walked into Bergdorf & Associates, a high-end travel boutique that specialized in luxury cruisewear. The sales associate, a sophisticated woman named Vivian, took one look at Dorothy's practical cardigan and sensible shoes and clearly prepared to show her the clearance rack. "I need an entire wardrobe for a 6-month world cruise," Dorothy announced, her voice carrying a confidence that surprised even herself. "Money is no object." Vivian's demeanor changed instantly. 6 months? My goodness, what an adventure! Are we talking about formal evenings, tropical excursions, cultural tours? "All of it," Dorothy said, pulling out the cruise itinerary. "I'll need everything from evening gowns for the captain's dinners to hiking boots for New Zealand, from cocktail dresses for Mediterranean sunsets to warm coats for the Norwegian fjords." For the next 4 hours, Dorothy tried on clothes she had never imagined wearing, flowing silk dresses in jewel tones that brought out the green in her eyes, elegant pantsuits in fabrics so luxurious they felt like water against her skin, evening gowns that made her feel like the sophisticated woman she had never allowed herself to become. "You have a wonderful figure," Vivian said as Dorothy modeled a navy blue cocktail dress with subtle beading. "Have you been hiding it under cardigans for decades?" "Something like that," Dorothy admitted, looking at herself in the 3-way mirror. The woman staring back at her looked confident, stylish, ready for adventure. She looked nothing like the self-effacing grandmother who had been disappearing into the background of her own life. The final bill came to $8,300. Old Dorothy would have been horrified by the amount. New Dorothy simply handed over her credit card and felt a thrill of excitement about wearing each beautiful piece. On Tuesday, Dorothy visited a salon that Patricia had mentioned going to for special occasions, the kind of place Dorothy had always considered too expensive and too frivolous for someone her age. She emerged 3 hours later with her silver hair cut into a chic bob that took 20 years off her appearance, professional makeup that highlighted features she had forgotten she had, and a manicure in a sophisticated shade called Adventure Awaits. The transformation was so dramatic that when she stopped at the grocery store on her way home, the checkout clerk she had known for 15 years didn't recognize her at first. "Mrs. Pemberton, my goodness, you look absolutely stunning. What's the occasion?" "I'm celebrating myself," Dorothy replied, and realized it was the truest thing she had said in years. Wednesday brought the most challenging task, dealing with her family's increasingly desperate attempts to change her mind. Her phone rang constantly, but Dorothy had turned off the ringer and was screening all calls. The voicemails piled up, each one more frantic than the last. "Robert, Mom, please call me back. Linda thinks maybe we should look into some kind of family therapy. Maybe we can work through this together." "Patricia, Mom, I've been doing some research on cruise ship safety for elderly passengers. Did you know that medical facilities on ships are very limited? What if something happens to you in international waters?" "Catherine, Mom, I talked to Dr. Henderson and he's concerned about you making major life decisions during what might be a psychological crisis. He thinks you should come in for an evaluation." "Michael, Mom, I flew in from Riverside Canyon. I'm at your house right now and you're not here. Where are you? We need to talk about this rationally." Dorothy listened to each message and felt something she had never experienced before: complete immunity to their manipulation tactics. The guilt, the fear-mongering, the attempts to paint her decision as mentally unstable, none of it touched her anymore. She was finally able to see these strategies for what they were: desperate attempts to maintain control over her life and her money. Instead of calling them back, Dorothy drove to Willowbrook Heights' most prestigious law firm, Henderson and Associates, and requested an immediate appointment with their senior partner. "I need to update my will," she told attorney Margaret Henderson, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s who had handled legal matters for many of Willowbrook Heights' wealthier residents. "Of course, Mrs. Pemberton. Are we talking about minor adjustments or more significant changes?" "Significant," Dorothy said, pulling out a handwritten list she had spent the previous evening preparing. "I want to establish a charitable foundation with the majority of my estate, the Dorothy Pemberton Foundation for Women's Independence." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "That's quite a substantial change. May I ask what prompted this decision?" "I've realized that leaving a large inheritance to my children would be the final disservice I could do to them," Dorothy explained. "They've become so dependent on the idea of my money as their security that they've forgotten how to value our relationships for any other reason." Over the next 2 hours, Dorothy outlined her new vision for her estate. The house would be sold, with proceeds going to the foundation. Her investment accounts would fund scholarships for single mothers returning to school, support groups for elderly people dealing with family neglect, and programs helping women start their own businesses after age 50. Each child would receive $50,000, enough to acknowledge their relationship to her, but not enough to fund their continued irresponsibility with money. "Are you certain about this, Mrs. Pemberton?" Margaret asked as they reviewed the documents. "This will represent a significant reduction in your children's expected inheritance." "I'm more certain about this than I've been about anything in my life," Dorothy replied, signing each page with a steady hand. Thursday evening brought the confrontation Dorothy had been expecting. She returned from a spa day, another first-time experience that had left her feeling relaxed and pampered, to find all 4 of her children sitting on her front porch. "We need to talk," Robert said as she approached, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "We've already talked," Dorothy replied, unlocking her front door. "I told you I was leaving, and I am." "Mom, stop," Patricia said, standing up to block her path. "This has gone far enough. We've been patient with your little rebellion, but you're about to make decisions that will affect this entire family." "My rebellion?" Dorothy almost smiled. "Patricia, I'm 80 years old. I think I've earned the right to make my own decisions about my life." "Not when those decisions are clearly irrational," Catherine interjected. "Mom, we love you, but spending $90,000 on a cruise when you could fall and break your hip or have a heart attack or I could have the time of my life," Dorothy finished. "I could see the world, I could meet new people, I could discover who I am when I'm not defined entirely by what I can do for all of you." Michael stepped forward, and Dorothy could see the desperation in his eyes. "Mom, I need you to understand something. My business is finally starting to turn around, but I need another year, maybe 2, to really establish it. If you spend your savings on this cruise, I won't have the security I need to take the risks that could make me successful." "Listen to yourself, Michael," Dorothy said softly. "You're asking me not to live my life so that you can feel secure about living yours." "That's not what I'm asking," he protested. "That's exactly what you're asking. All of you are asking me to stay small, stay predictable, stay available, so that your lives can remain comfortable and subsidized." Dorothy looked at her 4 children, these adults she had raised and supported and enabled, and felt a profound sadness for the people they had become under her well-intentioned but ultimately damaging care. "I enabled this," she said quietly. "I taught you that my job was to make your lives easier and your job was to let me. I taught you that my needs didn't matter as much as yours. I taught you that love meant sacrifice, but only sacrifice from me to you, never the other way around." She opened her front door and stepped inside, then turned to face them one more time. "But I'm not teaching you that anymore. In 2 weeks, I'm getting on that ship. And for the first time in my life, I'm going to discover who Dorothy Pemberton is when she's not being someone's mother, someone's bank account, or someone's emergency contact." "Mom, please," Catherine whispered. "Don't do this to us." "I'm not doing this to you," Dorothy replied, her hand on the door handle. "I'm finally doing something for me." And with that, she closed the door on her old life and stepped fully into her new one. The Empress of the Seas was even more magnificent than the photos had suggested. As Dorothy stood on the dock at Port Millhaven, her new luggage arranged beside her by the white-gloved porter service, she felt like she was stepping into a dream she had never dared to have. The ship rose 11 stories above the harbor, its pristine white hull gleaming in the October sunshine, with elegant balconies cascading down its sides like a waterfall of luxury. None of her children had come to see her off. Dorothy had left messages the night before, telling them her departure time and gate number, extending one final invitation for them to wish her well. The silence of her phone that morning had been her answer. "First time cruising, Mrs. Pemberton?" asked Captain Rodriguez, a distinguished man with silver at his temples, who personally greeted each royal suite guest as they boarded. "First time doing a lot of things," Dorothy replied, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. 3 weeks ago, the thought of traveling alone would have terrified her. Now, it felt like the beginning of everything she had been meant to become. Her suite was a revelation. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the ocean, with a private balcony furnished with teak chairs, and a small table perfect for morning coffee or evening wine. The marble bathroom was larger than her bedroom at home, complete with a soaking tub and a rainfall shower. Fresh orchids adorned every surface, and a bottle of champagne waited in an ice bucket with a note. "Welcome aboard, Mrs. Pemberton. May this be the journey of a lifetime." Dorothy kicked off her sensible walking shoes, the last remnant of her old wardrobe, and walked barefoot across the plush carpet to the balcony. As the ship pulled away from shore, she watched Willowbrook Heights disappear into the distance and felt something she had never experienced before: complete freedom from other people's expectations. That first evening at dinner, Dorothy was seated at a table for 8 in the ship's main dining room, the Constellation. She had worried about eating alone, about being the odd person out among couples and families. But her table mates turned out to be a fascinating collection of solo travelers and adventure seekers. "So what brings you on this journey, Dorothy?" asked Evelyn Chen, a retired physician from Vancouver who had booked the cruise to celebrate her 75th birthday. "I'm learning who I am when I'm not taking care of everyone else," Dorothy replied honestly. "Ah," said Thomas Blackwood, a widowed professor from Edinburgh, who was traveling to research his next book, "The Great Expedition of Self-Discovery. How wonderfully brave of you." "Brave?" Dorothy laughed. "My children think I'm having a mental breakdown." "Children often do when their parents start living for themselves," observed Maria Santos, a vibrant woman from Barcelona who had been traveling the world since her husband died 5 years earlier. "My daughter didn't speak to me for 6 months when I sold the family home and bought an apartment in Prague. She thought I was being selfish." "Were you?" Dorothy asked. "Absolutely," Maria grinned, "and it was the most liberating feeling of my life." Over dinner, Dorothy found herself sharing stories she had never told anyone, about Harold Mitchell, about the dreams she had deferred, about the gradual disappearance of herself into the role of eternal caregiver. Her table mates listened without judgment, sharing their own stories of late-life awakenings and the courage it took to disappoint people who preferred them diminished. "You know what I realized?" said James Morrison, a retired engineer from Australia who had taken up painting at age 70. "Our children love the idea of us, but they don't really know who we are. They see us as extensions of their own lives, not as complete people with our own stories." Dorothy felt a shock of recognition. That was exactly it. Her children loved the idea of having a devoted mother who would always be there for them, but they had never bothered to discover who Dorothy Pemberton actually was beneath that role. The days that followed brought a cascade of new experiences that Dorothy absorbed, like a woman who had been thirsty for decades. She took a watercolor painting class and discovered she had an eye for color and composition. She joined the ship's book club and found herself engaged in passionate discussions about literature she had never had time to read. She learned to play bridge from a group of retired teachers and was delighted to discover she had a natural talent for strategy. But perhaps most surprisingly, Dorothy found herself making friends. Real friends, not people who needed things from her or saw her primarily as a resource. She and Evelyn took long walks around the ship's promenade deck, talking about everything from medical ethics to travel dreams. She and Maria spent afternoons in the spa, gossiping and laughing like teenagers. She and Thomas debated philosophy over late-night cognac in the ship's library. "You're blooming," Evelyn observed one evening as they sat on Dorothy's balcony, watching the sunset paint the Mediterranean sky in shades of gold and coral. "It's like watching someone come alive." "I feel alive," Dorothy admitted. "For the first time in decades, I feel like I exist for my own sake, not just as someone's mother or grandmother or emergency contact." When the ship docked in Santorini, Dorothy did something that would have been unthinkable 3 weeks earlier. She went parasailing. Strapped into a harness and lifted high above the crystal-clear Aegean Sea, she looked down at the whitewashed buildings clinging to the volcanic cliffs and screamed with pure joy. The sound that came from her throat was primal, exuberant, completely uninhibited, the sound of a woman who had finally given herself permission to feel everything. "My God, Dorothy," Evelyn called out when she landed. "You looked like you were flying." "I was flying," Dorothy laughed, her face flushed with adrenaline and happiness. "I was actually flying." That evening, she called home for the first time since departure. Robert answered on the first ring. "Mom, thank God, we've been so worried. Are you okay? Are you safe?" "I'm wonderful," Dorothy said, looking out at the twinkling lights of Santorini Harbor. "I went parasailing today." "You what?" Robert's voice climbed an octave. "Mom, that's incredibly dangerous at your age. What if something had happened? What if you'd been hurt?" "Then I would have been hurt doing something that made me happy," Dorothy replied calmly. "Robert, can I ask you something? When was the last time you did something that scared you but thrilled you?" What kind of question is that? Mom, I'm a responsible adult with children and a mortgage. I can't just go around taking crazy risks." "I'm not talking about crazy risks. I'm talking about being fully alive. About feeling your heart race with excitement instead of just anxiety." There was a long pause. "Mom, I don't understand what's happening to you. This isn't like you at all." "No," Dorothy agreed, watching a couple dancing on the deck below her balcony. "This is exactly like me. This is who I was before I convinced myself that I only existed to make other people's lives easier." "But what about us? What about your family? What about your responsibilities?" Dorothy felt a familiar tug of guilt, but it was weaker now, like an old rope that had finally started to fray. "Robert, what about my dreams? What about my happiness? What about my right to live a full life while I still can?" "Mom, you're 80 years old." "Yes, I am. And I spent the first 80 years making sure everyone else got to pursue their dreams. Don't you think I deserve a chance to pursue mine?" When she hung up the phone, Dorothy felt lighter than she had in years. For the first time, she had been able to listen to her son's attempts to guilt her back into her old role without feeling obligated to comply. She was learning something profound. Love didn't require her to be small, convenient, or self-sacrificing. Real love would want her to be happy, fulfilled, and fully herself. As the ship sailed away from Santorini that night, Dorothy stood on her balcony in her new silk nightgown, feeling the Mediterranean breeze on her skin and listening to the sound of the waves against the hull. She thought about her children, probably lying awake worrying about her, trying to figure out how to get their predictable, manageable mother back. But that woman was gone forever. In her place was someone Dorothy was just beginning to meet, a woman who could parasail and make friends and debate philosophy and watch sunsets without feeling guilty about not being available for someone else's crisis. She was learning that it was never too late to become who you were meant to be, and she was just getting started. 3 months into her journey, Dorothy received an email that would have once sent her into a panic of guilt and obligation. She was sitting in the ship's internet cafe in Singapore, uploading photos from her temple tour to share with her new cruise friends, when the message appeared in her inbox. The subject line read, "Urgent, family emergency." It was from Patricia, and the message was typical of her daughter's dramatic communication style. "Mom, Catherine is in the hospital. She had a breakdown and tried to hurt herself. The doctors say she's been struggling with severe depression since her divorce, and she's been asking for you constantly. We need you to come home immediately. I've looked into emergency flights from Singapore. There's one leaving tomorrow that would get you to Millfield by Thursday. Please call me as soon as you get this." Old Dorothy would have been on the phone with the cruise line within minutes, arranging for emergency disembarkation, booking the first flight home, abandoning her own needs to rush to her daughter's crisis. Old Dorothy would have felt crushing guilt for being thousands of miles away when her child needed her, would have blamed herself for Catherine's breakdown, would have seen this as proof that her attempt at independence was selfish and destructive. New Dorothy read the email twice, closed her laptop, and walked to the ship's upper deck to think. The Singapore skyline glittered in the evening light, a modern metropolis that represented everything Dorothy had never imagined she would see. Tomorrow they would dock in Kuala Lumpur, then continue to Mumbai, and eventually to the African coast she had dreamed of visiting since she was young. She had been looking forward to the wildlife safari in Kenya, to seeing elephants and lions in their natural habitat, to experiencing the vast beauty of a continent she had only seen in National Geographic magazines. But her daughter was in crisis. Her daughter was asking for her. Dorothy found Maria Santos on the Serenity deck, practicing Tai Chi as she did every evening at sunset. "You look troubled, my friend," Maria observed, flowing gracefully from one pose to another. Dorothy showed her the email. Maria read it carefully, then handed the phone back without comment. "What would you do?" Dorothy asked. "What I did when my daughter called to tell me my grandson had been arrested for drug possession," Maria replied, moving into the next Tai Chi sequence. "I sent money for a good lawyer, I sent a message of love and support, and I stayed exactly where I was. But this is different. Catherine tried to hurt herself." "Did she?" Maria asked gently. "Or did she make a gesture designed to get you to come running home? And does it matter? Either way, the solution isn't for you to abandon your life to manage hers." Dorothy felt the familiar pull of maternal obligation, but it was weaker now, like an old muscle that had been stretched beyond its capacity to contract. "I feel guilty," she admitted. "Good," Maria said, completing her routine and sitting beside Dorothy on the deck chairs. "Guilt means you're changing. Guilt means you're choosing yourself over their expectations. If you weren't feeling guilty, it would mean you hadn't really broken free." That evening, Dorothy called the crisis hotline at Millfield General Hospital and spoke to Catherine's psychiatrist, Dr. Elizabeth Warren. What she learned both surprised and saddened her. "Your daughter has been struggling with depression for much longer than the family realized," Dr. Warren explained. "She's been self-medicating with alcohol and prescription drugs, and she's been using financial stress as an excuse to avoid dealing with her underlying mental health issues." "Is she in immediate danger?" Dorothy asked. "No, she's stable and receiving appropriate care, but she's going to need long-term therapy and possibly medication adjustment. Most importantly, she's going to need to develop coping mechanisms that don't involve crisis calls to family members." "What do you mean?" "Mrs. Pemberton, I've reviewed Catherine's history, and there's a pattern here. Every time she faces a significant challenge, her divorce, financial stress, custody issues, she escalates to crisis mode and calls you. You respond by solving her problems, usually with financial assistance, and she temporarily feels better. But she never actually learns to handle difficulties on her own." Dorothy felt a chill of recognition. "You're saying I've been enabling her?" "I'm saying that your well-intentioned support may have prevented her from developing the resilience she needs to handle adult challenges. She's learned that if she creates enough drama, you'll rescue her. So what should I do? What you're doing. Love her, support her emotionally, but don't rush to solve her problems for her. Let her experience the consequences of her choices and learn to navigate them herself. Dorothy hung up the phone, feeling a mixture of relief and profound sadness. Relief that Catherine wasn't in mortal danger, but sadness at the realization of how thoroughly she had damaged her children by making their lives too easy. The next morning, instead of booking an emergency flight home, Dorothy sent a carefully crafted email to Patricia. I spoke with Dr. Warren last night and learned that Catherine is receiving excellent care. I've arranged for a $5,000 deposit to cover any medical expenses not covered by insurance, and I'll be calling Catherine twice a week to check on her progress. However, I will not be coming home. Catherine needs to learn to handle this crisis with the support of professionals and her local family, not by having her mother abandon her own life to manage hers. This is not abandonment. This is love expressed through healthy boundaries. I'll be home in 3 months as scheduled, and we can discuss Catherine's ongoing treatment plan then. The response from Patricia was swift and furious. I can't believe you're choosing a vacation over your daughter's mental health. What kind of mother does that? Catherine is devastated that you won't come. We all are. This proves that you've become completely selfish. Dorothy read the message without the familiar stab of guilt. Instead, she felt clarity. She called Patricia directly. "Let me ask you something," Dorothy said when her daughter answered. "When Catherine called you in crisis, did you drop everything and rush to her side?" "That's different. I have responsibilities, a career." "So do I. I have a responsibility to myself to live the life I've waited 80 years to experience. I have a career now, too, the career of being Dorothy Pemberton instead of just everyone's mother." "Mom, that's ridiculous. You can't compare your cruise to my job." "Why not? Because my happiness is less important than your career? Because my dreams are less valuable than your responsibilities?" Patricia was silent for a moment. "Mom, people will think you're a terrible mother." "What people, Patricia? The people who have spent decades watching me disappear into my role as your family's support system? The people who have never once asked what I wanted or needed? Those people? Your children need you. My children need to learn to handle their lives without me. Catherine needs to develop coping skills that don't involve manipulating me into rescuing her. Robert needs to learn to manage his finances without my safety net. Michael needs to understand that his business success can't depend on his mother's sacrifices. And you need to learn that love doesn't mean having a parent who's available to solve every problem you face." Dorothy paused, looking out at the bustling port of Kuala Lumpur, where vendors were selling exotic fruits and handmade crafts to tourists eager to experience something new. "I love all of you more than my own life," she continued, "but I finally understand that loving you doesn't require me to have no life of my own. Real love, healthy love, wants the other person to be happy and fulfilled, even if it's inconvenient." After she hung up, Dorothy walked to the ship's spa and booked a full day of treatments. Massage, facial, manicure, the works. She was learning something profound about self-care. It wasn't selfish indulgence, but necessary maintenance for a person who planned to keep showing up fully in her own life. That afternoon, she called Catherine directly from her balcony, watching the Malaysian coastline drift by. "Mom?" Catherine's voice was small, fragile. "Hi, sweetheart. How are you feeling today?" "Scared, ashamed, angry that you won't come home." "I understand all of those feelings," Dorothy said gently, "but I want you to think about something. Every time you've faced a crisis in your adult life, I've come running to fix it. How has that worked out for you?" Catherine was quiet for a long time. I never learned to handle things on my own." "No, you didn't. And that's partly my fault, because I made it too easy for you to avoid growing up emotionally. But that stops now." "So you're just going to abandon me?" "I'm going to love you enough to let you figure out how strong you actually are." I'm going to love you enough to stop enabling your dependence on crisis as a coping mechanism. And I'm going to love myself enough to continue living the life I've waited 80 years to discover. By the time Dorothy hung up, she felt something she had never experienced before. The confidence that she had done the right thing, even though it was the difficult thing. She was learning that real strength sometimes looked like staying put, that real love sometimes required saying no, that real transformation sometimes meant disappointing people who preferred you weak and available. That evening, as the ship sailed toward India, Dorothy joined her friends for dinner wearing a new dress she had bought in Singapore, a flowing silk creation in deep emerald that made her eyes sparkle and her silver hair shine like platinum. "You look like a woman who's made peace with herself," Thomas observed over wine. "I'm learning," Dorothy replied, raising her glass in a toast. "I'm finally learning who I am when I choose myself." 5.5 months into her journey, Dorothy stood on the deck of the Empress of the Seas as it approached the final port of call, Barcelona, Spain. Tomorrow, they would dock in her home port of Millhaven, and her extraordinary adventure would officially end. But as she watched the Spanish coastline emerge from the morning mist, Dorothy realized that while the cruise was ending, her transformation was permanent. The woman who would disembark tomorrow bore little resemblance to the diminished, self-sacrificing grandmother who had boarded 6 months earlier. Dorothy's silver hair now fell in elegant waves to her shoulders, professionally styled at salons and ports from Tokyo to Cape Town. Her skin had a healthy glow from months of Mediterranean sun and spa treatments. Most importantly, her eyes held a confidence and vitality that hadn't been there for decades. "Hard to believe it's almost over," said Evelyn, joining Dorothy at the ship's railing. Over the past months, their friendship had deepened into something Dorothy had never experienced before, a relationship based on mutual respect, shared interests, and genuine affection rather than need or obligation. "The cruise is almost over," Dorothy corrected with a smile, "but this life I've discovered, this is just the beginning." Evelyn studied her friend's face. "You've made some decisions about what comes next, haven't you?" Dorothy pulled out her phone and showed Evelyn a series of emails she had been exchanging with a real estate agent in Barcelona. "I've put an offer on an apartment here. 2 bedrooms, a balcony overlooking the Mediterranean, walking distance to museums and cafes. I'm moving to Spain." "Dorothy," Evelyn gasped, "that's wonderful. But what about your family? What about going home?" "I am going home," Dorothy said quietly. "For the first time in my life, I'm choosing a home based on what makes me happy, not what makes me convenient for other people." The decision had crystallized 3 weeks earlier during their stop in Seville. Dorothy had been wandering through the narrow cobblestone streets, admiring the architecture and soaking in the vibrant atmosphere, when she realized something profound. She felt more alive in this foreign city, surrounded by strangers, than she had ever felt in Willowbrook Heights, surrounded by family. That evening, she had sat in a small tapas bar, sharing wine and conversation with other travelers, and understood that this was what life could be like. Not constantly interrupted by crisis calls, not defined by other people's emergencies, not measured by how much she could give up for others, but rich with new experiences, meaningful connections, and the simple pleasure of existing for her own sake. "Have you told your children?" Evelyn asked. "Not yet, but I will when I'm ready." Dorothy's voice carried a strength that still surprised her. "I've learned that I don't need their permission to live my life." That afternoon, Dorothy received a video call from her grandchildren. All 8 of them crowded around Patricia's laptop screen, clearly coached by their parents to guilt their grandmother into feeling homesick. "Grandma Dorothy, we miss you so much," 10-year-old Emma said, her eyes wide and pleading. "When are you coming home? We made you a welcome home banner." "Mom said you might not come back," added James, Robert's oldest. "But that's not true, right? You have to come back. This is where you live." Dorothy felt the familiar tug of guilt, but it was different now. a distant echo rather than a controlling force. She looked at these beautiful children who barely knew her, who had been taught to see her as a source of gifts and services rather than a complete person with her own dreams and needs. "I love you all very much," she said gently, "and I will always be your grandmother. But I'm learning that loving someone doesn't mean you have to live your life exactly the way they want you to." "But Grandma," 12-year-old Joshua said, his voice breaking slightly, "if you don't come home, who's going to help us with our math homework? Who's going to bake cookies for our school events? Who's going to babysit us when Mom and Dad need to go out?" The questions hit Dorothy like a revelation. These children, through no fault of their own, had been taught to value her for her services rather than her person. They loved Grandma Dorothy, the babysitter, the baker, the homework helper, but they had no idea who Dorothy Pemberton actually was. "Joshua," she said softly, "do you know what I wanted to be when I was your age?" The boy looked confused. A mom? "I wanted to be an artist. I wanted to travel the world and paint pictures of all the beautiful places I visited. I wanted to live in Paris and learn French, and maybe write a book about my adventures." "But you became a nurse," Emma said, clearly trying to understand. "Yes, I became a nurse because I needed to support my family. And then I became a mother, and then a grandmother. And somewhere along the way, I forgot about the artist who lived inside me." She paused, looking at their young faces through the screen, hoping they might understand something their parents never had. But she was always there, waiting. And now, finally, I'm letting her live. After the call ended, Dorothy walked to the art studio on the ship's upper deck, where she had been taking watercolor classes for the past 4 months. Her easel held her latest painting, a vibrant scene of the Moroccan marketplace they had visited 2 weeks earlier, full of color and life and movement. "It's your best work yet," said Marcus, the ship's resident art instructor, as he reviewed her progress. "You have a natural eye for composition and color. Have you ever considered taking this seriously?" "I'm 80 years old," Dorothy replied. "Is it too late to take anything seriously?" Marcus laughed. "My grandmother didn't start painting until she was 75. She had her first gallery showing at 82 and sold every piece. Age is just a number when it comes to art. What matters is passion and persistence." That evening, Dorothy made 2 important phone calls. The first was to her real estate agent in Barcelona, confirming her offer on the apartment and beginning the process of establishing Spanish residency. The second was to Margaret Henderson, her lawyer back in Willowbrook Heights. "I need you to handle the sale of my house," Dorothy said. "I won't be returning to live there permanently." "Mrs. Pemberton, are you certain about this? It's a significant step." "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." "What should I tell your children when they inevitably call asking about this?" Dorothy considered the question carefully. Her children would be shocked, then angry, then probably try every manipulation tactic they had ever used to change her mind. They would accuse her of selfishness, of abandoning her family, of having a mental breakdown. They would threaten to cut her off from the grandchildren, to refuse to speak to her, to tell everyone in Willowbrook Heights what a terrible mother she had become. "Tell them the truth," Dorothy said finally. "Tell them their mother has decided to live." That night, as the ship sailed through the calm Mediterranean waters toward her final port of call, Dorothy sat on her balcony with a glass of Spanish wine and her journal, another new habit she had developed during the voyage. She wrote, "Tomorrow I will set foot on land as a different person than I was 6 months ago. I am no longer Dorothy, the perpetual caregiver, Dorothy the enabler, Dorothy the woman who existed only in relation to other people's needs. I am Dorothy the artist, Dorothy the adventurer, Dorothy the woman who chose herself. My children will be angry, they will feel abandoned and betrayed. They will not understand that this is not about rejecting them, but about finally accepting myself. They will see my happiness as their loss, my freedom as their abandonment. But I have learned something precious during these months at sea. I cannot set myself on fire to keep others warm. I cannot disappear as a person so that others can feel comfortable taking from me. I cannot love others by refusing to love myself. I am 80 years old, and I am just beginning to live. For the first time in my life, I am choosing joy over guilt, adventure over obligation, growth over stagnation. I am discovering who Dorothy Pemberton is when she is not defined by what she can do for others. And she is magnificent. As Dorothy closed her journal and prepared for bed, she felt something she had never experienced before: complete peace with her own choices. Tomorrow would bring challenges, confrontations, and probably heartbreak as her family struggled to accept the woman she had become. But tonight, sailing through the star-filled Mediterranean darkness toward a future of her own choosing, Dorothy Pemberton was exactly where she belonged. The frightened, guilt-ridden woman who had boarded this ship was gone forever, replaced by someone who understood that the greatest gift she could give her children was the example of a woman who refused to disappear, who chose to bloom rather than fade, who insisted on living fully until her very last breath. Tomorrow, her new life would begin in earnest, and Dorothy could hardly wait. The port of Millhaven looked smaller than Dorothy remembered, as the Empress of the Seas glided into its berth on that crisp April morning. 6 months ago, this harbor had represented the edge of everything she knew, the boundary of her safe but suffocating world. Now it felt like a brief stop in a much larger journey. Dorothy stood at the ship's railing in a flowing coral dress she had bought in Santorini, her silver hair catching the morning sunlight, her skin glowing with health and vitality. She was saying goodbye to Evelyn, Thomas, Maria, and the dozen other friends who had become her chosen family during the voyage. "Promise you'll visit me in Barcelona," Dorothy said, embracing Evelyn warmly. "Try to keep me away," Evelyn replied. "I want to see this new life you're building." "And you must come to Edinburgh for Christmas," Thomas added. "My daughter is dying to meet the woman who convinced her boring old father to take tango lessons." Dorothy laughed, remembering their hilarious attempts at dancing during the ship's formal evenings. "I'll bring my castanets." As she walked down the gangplank with her luggage, new leather pieces that bore travel stickers from 6 continents, Dorothy saw them waiting at the terminal. All 4 of her children stood in a tight cluster, their faces wearing expressions of carefully controlled anxiety mixed with barely suppressed anger. Behind them, she could see several of her grandchildren holding handmade "Welcome Home Grandma" signs. For a moment, looking at her family's expectant faces, Dorothy felt an echo of her old impulse to shrink herself, to become small and apologetic, to reassure them that nothing had really changed. But the feeling passed like a brief shadow, replaced by something much stronger: compassion for the difficult conversation they were all about to have. "Mom," Robert said as she approached, his voice strained, "you look different." "I look happy," Dorothy replied simply, setting down her luggage and opening her arms to embrace each of her children. She noticed how they hesitated, how they seemed almost afraid to touch this transformed version of their mother. Catherine had lost weight and looked fragile, but her eyes were clearer than they had been in years. "I've been in therapy," she said quietly, "like you suggested. It's been difficult, but helpful." "I'm proud of you for doing the work," Dorothy said, meaning it completely. Patricia was wearing her armor of professional efficiency, but Dorothy could see the uncertainty beneath it. "We need to talk, Mom. There are a lot of things to discuss. Your house, your finances, your plans." "Yes, we do need to talk," Dorothy agreed. "But first, I want to spend time with my grandchildren. I have 6 months of stories to share." For the next hour, Dorothy sat in the terminal cafe surrounded by her grandchildren, showing them photos on her tablet from her journey around the world. She told them about riding camels in Morocco, seeing the northern lights in Norway, swimming with dolphins in New Zealand, and learning to paint watercolors in the Greek islands. "Grandma, you look like a movie star in these pictures," Emma said, studying a photo of Dorothy in an elegant evening gown at the captain's dinner. I feel like one too, sweetheart, Dorothy replied. Do you know what I learned on my trip? What? Asked Joshua, genuinely curious. I learned that it's never too late to become who you were meant to be. I learned that dreams don't have expiration dates, and that the most important person to make happy in your life is yourself. But what about making your family happy? Asked James, clearly parroting something he had heard from his parents. Dorothy considered the question carefully. James, do you think I look happy in these pictures? The boy nodded enthusiastically. And when I'm happy, when I'm excited about my life and my adventures, doesn't that make you feel good too? Yes, he admitted. That's because real love wants the other person to be happy and fulfilled, even if it's different from what we expected. My job as your grandmother isn't to make myself small so that your parents feel comfortable. My job is to show you what it looks like to live a full, brave, joyful life. After the children were taken to get ice cream by Patricia's husband, Dorothy finally sat down with her 4 adult children in the terminal's quiet lounge area. The conversation she had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure was about to begin. Mom, Patricia started, her voice carefully controlled. We understand that you needed some time away. We understand that we made mistakes and that you felt unappreciated. But this has gone far enough. It's time to come home and get back to reality. This is my reality now, Dorothy replied calmly. I'm not the same person who left 6 months ago, and I'm not going back to being her. Robert leaned forward, his face flushed with frustration. Mom, you can't just abandon your family. You can't just walk away from your responsibilities. What responsibilities, Robert? My responsibility to fund your poor financial decisions? My responsibility to provide free babysitting so your wife can go to spa days? My responsibility to solve every crisis that any of you create? That's not fair, Catherine began. Isn't it? Dorothy interrupted gently. Catherine, in the 8 months since your divorce, how many times have you called me because you needed something? And how many times have you called just to see how I was doing? Catherine's silence was her answer. I've sold the house, Dorothy continued, watching their faces as the words sank in. I'm moving to Barcelona permanently. I've enrolled in art classes at the university there, and I'm planning to travel for several months each year. I'm going to live the life I've been dreaming of for 80 years. You can't do that, Michael said, his voice rising. What about us? What about the grandchildren? What about your family? What about my happiness? Dorothy asked quietly. What about my dreams? What about my right to exist as more than just your safety net? Patricia's corporate mask was beginning to crack. Mom, this is insane. You're 80 years old. You can't just start a new life at 80. Why not? Dorothy asked. Because it's inconvenient for you? Because it forces you to take responsibility for your own lives? Because it means you can't count on my money and my constant availability anymore? The silence that followed was heavy with decades of unspoken truths. Finally, Catherine spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. So you're just leaving us? Dorothy's heart ached at the pain in her daughter's voice, but her resolve didn't waver. I'm not leaving you, sweetheart. I'm finally finding me. There's a difference. She pulled out a folder she had prepared during the voyage and handed each of them a letter. These explain everything, she said. My new address, my phone number, my email. You're all welcome to visit me in Barcelona. You're welcome to call me and share your lives with me. But I will not be your crisis hotline anymore. I will not be your bank. I will not abandon my own life every time one of you needs rescuing. But Mom, Robert said desperately, we love you. We need you. I love you too, Dorothy replied. I love you enough to stop enabling your dependence on me. I love you enough to show you what it looks like to choose yourself. And I need you to learn to love me the same way. Not for what I can do for you, but for who I am. As Dorothy stood to leave, Patricia grabbed her arm. Mom, please, don't do this. Think about what people will say. Think about your reputation. What kind of mother abandons her family? Dorothy looked at her daughter with infinite sadness and infinite love. The kind of mother who finally understands that she's been teaching her children that women should disappear for the sake of others. The kind of mother who decides to show them a different way to live. She gently extracted her arm from Patricia's grip. I've spent 80 years being the woman you needed me to be. Now I'm going to spend whatever time I have left being the woman I was meant to be. As Dorothy walked toward the taxi that would take her to the airport for her flight back to Barcelona, she heard Catherine call out behind her. Mom, wait! What if we need you? What if something terrible happens? Dorothy turned back one last time, her silver hair shining in the afternoon sunlight, her coral dress flowing around her like a banner of independence. Then you'll handle it, she said with complete confidence. Because you're strong, capable adults who have forgotten how powerful you are, because I made your lives too easy. And when you do handle it, when you discover that you can solve your own problems and live your own lives, you'll understand that this isn't abandonment. This is the greatest gift I could ever give you. 6 months later, Dorothy received a video call at her Barcelona apartment. She was sitting on her balcony, an easel beside her holding her latest painting, a vibrant scene of the Mediterranean at sunset. Her Spanish was improving, her art was flourishing, and her eyes held a joy that seemed to illuminate her entire face. The call was from Emma, who was now 11 and visiting her Aunt Catherine. Grandma Dorothy, guess what? Mom got a promotion at work, and she says it's because she learned to handle difficult situations without panicking. And Aunt Catherine started her own business. She's a life coach now, helping other divorced women become independent. Uncle Robert learned to budget properly and doesn't stress about money anymore. And Uncle Michael's business is successful now because he learned to take smart risks instead of depending on safety nets. Dorothy smiled, her heart full of pride and love. That's wonderful, sweetheart. I'm so proud of all of them. Grandma, I think I understand now why you had to leave. You didn't leave us. You taught us how to be strong like you. You were always strong, Emma. You just needed to discover it for yourselves. As Dorothy ended the call and returned to her painting, she reflected on the year that had changed everything. She had lost the role of perpetual caregiver, but she had gained something infinitely more valuable, herself. Her children had lost their safety net, but they had discovered their own strength. Her grandchildren had lost a convenience, but they had gained a role model. The sun was setting over the Mediterranean, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that would make a beautiful addition to her next painting. Dorothy Pemberton, at 81 years old, was exactly where she belonged, living her own life, on her own terms, surrounded by beauty and possibility. She had finally learned the most important lesson of all. It's never too late to choose yourself, and the people who truly love you will learn to love you for it. If you enjoyed Dorothy's journey of self-discovery and empowerment, leave a rating from 0 to 10 in the comments below. Your feedback helps us bring you more inspiring stories about courage, transformation, and the power of choosing yourself. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more life-changing stories. Now click on the video that appears on your screen and continue watching another incredible tale of personal transformation. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.